Hold on a second. And I'm going to.
Okay.
Okay, we're live now. I'm admitting everyone.
That's good.
Temporarily turn off the waiting room.
All right, great. Good morning, everybody. Hello, nice to see you here. I know it's going to take some time for people to get in, and especially in a morning event, it takes a few more minutes to kind of log on and meet us here. But thanks for being here for this event entitled Transdisciplinary Intelligence Meets Positive Disruption, Decolonizing Research with Entrepreneurial Residents. We are so pleased and fortunate to work with um, one of our fourth space pals now, Shazleen Pierre-Paul, who we've done a few wonderful workshops with in the past kind of a year or even a couple of years. You're going to have a great time here today with Shazleen, who is currently completing her master's in translation studies with a project on transracial indigenous digital oral culture. She's also a very creative and dedicated kind of to transdisciplinarity as a way to positively disrupt narratives of power and reverse the polarities of underprivileged and privileged so as to empower racialized non-binary allies into agency, positive visibility, and self-governance. That's quite a mouthful, but as you'll see in today's workshop, Shazeen has this wonderful way of allowing you all of us together into the conversation to kind of unravel some of these ideas and join in the conversation. So I'll let her tell you about the workshop in just a second as we get started. But before I do, I'll just say a quick word about Fourth Space. We are meeting in a kind of virtual Fourth Space format, which is a university-wide platform focused on working collaboratively with our community across the disciplines so as to activate basically what people are working on in terms of research and various kind of initiatives via interactive events such as this one. So I invite you to become familiar with what we do if you're unaware of that by going to concordia.ca/4 and checking out some of our programming. And we're also recording this session. So I'll pop a link into the chat afterwards for where you can find the video if you missed it or you want to share it with your friends. So we'll be making that available for you. Obviously, as you can already see, we're running this workshop as a meeting. I mean, obviously, the idea is for you to engage and interact in all of the ways that Zoom allows for. So there will be some time later on to go into breakout rooms. There will be time to be here in space together and kind of join forces and collaboratively work through some of these ideas that Shazleen will be presenting to you. So we do encourage you to open up your cameras and join into the conversation using kind of audio, video, and of course text if you're more comfortable with that. In terms of the recording, we're keeping the view on Shazleen, so don't worry, you won't be part of that recording. All right, I think on that note, I'm passing it over to you, and Shazleen, have a wonderful workshop. Welcome.
Thank you so much, everyone, Anna, Douglas, and the whole team. And it's a privilege to be here with you today. So what I'm going to do is we're going to get started as people, keep on trickling in. And I feel the beauteous way to, just get into the thick of our conversation, our space of co-creation, is to start with, the land acknowledgements. And then we can see how that interrelates with our bigger purpose for our conversation today. So I will be sharing my screen with you right now. And this is brought to us by, Concordia. There's the Indigenous Direction Leadership Group, in case you're interested. So I would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganigahiga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Jojage Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. And so to me, it's important to start with the acknowledgement, but to mobilize it as part of how we interact with discourse within and outside of the academy. So it's not lip service. is holding space for how we want to decenter the narratives of white supremacy that are part of how the narrative around knowledge, the academy, research, and all of that is constituted. And in a second, we will get right to it, but that is just a premise. Now is the little presentation, and I'll make this available to you. So if ever you're taking notes, feel comfortable just focusing on what it is not written rather than the textual information, because it will be made available to you afterwards. So let's get right to it. So as you see, here's the title, and I just wanted to take a second to unpack what the title is so that we can clarify the directionality of our conversation forward and the workshop itself, and also as a means for you to have more of an understanding and to already have value out of this moment of, this introductory segment. So it's called Transdisciplinary Intelligence Meets Positive Disruption, Decolonizing Research with Entrepreneurial Resonance. There's a lot there to unpack, right? So really quickly, to me, transdisciplinary intelligence is how basically wherever you are, you learn to leverage different kind of discourse to support the way that we can decolonize, let's say, disciplinary intelligence in your circle. So if I'm studying translation or psychology or engineering, there's a very static narrative that dominates how the economy of knowledge is circulated and produced in that environment. So there are a lot of what you could call institutional cliches around the intellectual quality of the knowledges that we integrate, right? And the transdisciplinary aspect to me that means positive disruption is when you can look at that narrative and look at where it asserts dominance and where through its dominance it erases, it controls, it perverts, and then your investigation is how can I reshuffle a lot of what is available to me in that space to now create, an opposite dynamics that is extremely dynamic, rich, empowering, and creates a space for decolonization. And to me, decolonization and our conversation is how we want to look at the way that we can rethink innovation in our own disciplines, in our own fields, in our own research, in our own, social economy of knowledge. And the connection then with entrepreneurial resonance is very pertinent because my investment is in making so that intellectual knowledge carries direct implication for practical social transformation in our communities. Because creating, boasting a sense of intellectualism just for the sake of being intellectually sounding or passing or heightened, it's not particularly, a collective endeavor that is fruitful. But when we can look at, intellectualism as something that allows us to practically create better conditions for an environment of social justice, then the practical meets the conceptual. And what's disruptive about that is that all throughout we're basically reshuffling and re-leveraging things that were available to us, but we never recognized for the potential that they had to destabilize what is normal, convenient, safe, but also problematic, systemic, and supremacist in intent, in its functionality, and its in structurality, right? So when you bring all of those different words together, they collide and they create a very linear path from, thought to action, from disruption to execution that makes it very smooth, organic, and enhancing for you on a personal level to do this kind of work. And from your heightened consciousness, there's a direct impact that is measurable from the standpoint of specific communities that exist within your community of practice, right? As a researcher, as a student, as a learner, as an entrepreneur, as an activist. And this is what I meant by the title. As I said, don't worry, we will get into more of it in a second, but I felt it would be very pertinent right from the get-go to dissect, the different segments that allow us to understand how does that all come together and where can I potentially see myself existing within that space, within that conversation. So let's roll on ahead. So thank you so much for being here. As I said, I know more people are joining, and this is my world. I love looking at the intersection, the points of power and intersection between positive disruption for a purpose and social impact. And we get to do that where we are today in the academy and beyond. And so that's what we're going to be, investigating. Really quickly, who I am. A few many things. I guess the most reductive way to look at me would be as a student. But what I love to do is my work as a transformation coach and social impact expert on innovation, economic empowerment, and rebellious leadership. And basically, it's this idea that what I'm sharing with you has been part of my journey from leveraging the positionality and the privileges I was not particularly aware that I had, or that I was not necessarily exploiting to the fullest. And I want to share with you how you can also find different ways to be self-empowered in a way that creates and generates and protects collective empowerment through your research and beyond, right? And a lot of that is about thinking different about what you think you know, and creating different ways for you to groom your awareness in a very concrete, practical way that carries, direct accountability towards a group that isn't you and that decenters you and your ego. So before we get into this, I love to deal with something at the beginning, which is my energetic commitment. And what I'm going to do is I will model the way forward on that one, and then open up the space for you to also produce your own energetic commitment. And you can think of it as a bit of an icebreaker. Then we're going to segue into some prompts, and then we're going to jump right into the framework. And before I get into all of that, I just want to give you a sense of how the workshop, is articulated. So we have the initial prompts to understand where is everybody coming in from? What are expectations for this? And how can we harmonize, what I feel called to share to you and what you feel called to receive, right? So that already we can activate that co-creation. Then after that is going to be, I will be timing myself right there. So about 15 or so minutes of me breaking down the framework so that you can understand the title, but in a much more organic, complex, and yet simplified way. And once that will be established, we'll have plenty of examples to help cement in your mind, in your spirit, in your consciousness, what it means, like what it means when the whole thought is formalized, when it's operationalized, when it exists within a concrete project or research or idea, right? And then Q&As, and at any given point in time, you're welcome to ask questions, but know that there's going to be a dedicated moment for that. And after that, we're going to have a bit of a quiz, some engagement, more questions, more prompts, depending on where our energy levels are. We might take a bit of a break. And then we're going to get into the co-creation moment, which is we're flipping the script. And now that you know the fullest spectrum of how to execute and operationalize that level of transdisciplinary intelligence in your field, now you get to test the waters and smaller groups and to see what it means to you and what are the potentialities that you haven't yet explored that you can use to augment the quality of your research in a very decolonial, fashion and anti-colonial fashion. So that's the gist. And as a wrap up to that, a beautiful conversation, more space for you to unpack, challenge, revisit, share, and connect as a community. And then just talking with different places where we can keep the conversation alive. So this is a breakdown for the workshop, just to get you situated. And now we're ready just to jump right in. So I'm going to get into my energetic commitment. What it is basically my way to activate self-empowerment and accountability from a very positive place and a very welcoming place. I don't ask how you're doing because it pulls you into what so-and-so did to you, what happened, and it's not much centered around your power to be change-making in the now. So the energetic commitment, to me, it's like 3 words or expressions, and it speaks to how I want to embody presence, power, truth, and possibility in this cocoon, in this instant of truth and possibility and human connection. So I will share mine with you and unpack them, and then give you a minute to think about yours. And feel free to unmute at that point and to share them. Or if you're a bit on the shyer side or what have you, feel free to share in the chat. But my intention, basically, it's a form of intention setting. I want us to be interrupted today. So that's the first word. Interrupted in the sense that there's a trajectory of what is normal and repetitive and also unchallenging and non-self-conscious for us to perform over and over again. And I want today to be a moment of interruption for that. You could call it disruption as well, but I want us to be positively interrupted in our own narratives of what research is and of what our agency is, and even about what our identities and positionality are or aren't. And then the second tier to that is I want this to be a space where we get to be truthful, where we get to exert emotional courage, openly knowing that it will be met and received and honored through non-judgmentality. So to be truthful, ask questions that, maybe you feel, oh my goodness, should I be saying this or no? Because this is a time to unpack all of that and to see the value in what is perceived as ignorance. And there's also such a thing as willful ignorance, right? So to me, the other word is truthful. And the last one is to be committed. I would love for us by the end of this, unraveling and unfolding of the event, to find a way to assert true commitment towards how can I make this practical in my field, in my research, and to operate from a place of self-empowerment as we do so. So to integrate the knowledge, revisit our own projects, be it research, be it activism, be it entrepreneurialism, whatever it is, and to find a direct, link, space of connectivity, and to honor that and to be committed. I want us to walk the talk. I don't want us to merely talk it. And that's it. So those are my three words: for us to be interrupted and what is safe, normal, convenient for us. I want us to be truthful and self-reflexive and emotionally courageous about how we are opening ourselves up to revisit biases and to lead with questions that are the dearest to us, but that may feel the most revealing as well. And last but not least is for us to be committed to integrating all of those beautiful knowledges and to move it forward through our research, our activism, our entrepreneurship, whatever the projects may be themselves. So those are my three words: interrupted, truthful, and committed. And so take a second and think about yours, and then think about, who do I want to be in this space? How do I want to show up in this conversation? And what does my power look like and taste like in this instant of truth, of possibility, and human connection? So that's my question to you. I'll give you a second, think it through. And again, feel free to share in the chat and or unmute yourself. You're welcome to do so at any point in time. Don't be shy. So just giving you a second. I'll be taking a sip of water and think it through. So how do I want to show up today in this space, in this conversation, is my question to you. What are your words? Giving you a minute. Just let me see if I can look at your beautiful faces. So think about this, and it could be, a moment of internal self-reflection. You don't have to vocalize it, but it will help. The more open you are with yourself and your questionings, the more fruitful this is going to be on a collective level for everybody else. Just saying. So I will give you a few more seconds. Anybody feels, comfortable jumping in, whether it be in the chat or by unmuting themselves, you're welcome to do so. Oh, yay. Thank you, Nicole. So we have a first courageous soul, and Nicole is saying, wanted to be unsettled, vulnerable, and looking at action. I love this. I feel that there are a lot of echoes, right? So vulnerability as truth, as the highest truth to be protected in this space and honored, and being unsettled, right? Because only when you're unsettled and out of sync and balance with what is safe and normal and convenient for you can you grow, learn, be enlightened, and thus enlightening. And action, I totally agree with you, Nicole, because too often I see a lot of beauteous, abstract intellectualism, and I see no concrete action that correlates that. And if the sake of intellectualism is to be boastful, then it's not an act of service and it's wasteful. Not because there's a potential for it to be more, but because it is only accomplished as boastful, but not as, an act of service. So I love this. So you see everybody just follow Nicole's lead, engage in the chat and unmute yourselves. So I will give you a few more seconds and then we're just going to move forward. I'll have another sip of water in the meantime. Perfecto. So again, keep populating the chat. I will just keep moving forward. So now, first things first, I want to know about what brings you here today. So what is on your mind to share? What do you feel called to share or to ask? And or what's one question whose answer you can't leave without today? So it's a different way of rearticulating the same thought, but just giving you more of different ways to access a conversation from what is most truthful or authentic about your experience. But what made you click on the button and register for this session? What is the alignment that you can sense between what is proposed or advertised and what is seeping very deep in your consciousness that just goes, oh my goodness, I have to reach out. I have to be here. I don't want to miss this, because I want us to be able to honor that and then to pivot it into something that's going to be instrumental in how the conversation unfolds organically, hereafter. So again, take a moment, think it through. You can share in the chat and or simply unmute yourselves. So the question being, a variation, a spin on what brings you here today. What do you want to talk about? What are you called to share or to ask with our group here, with our community? So again, giving you a few seconds, just look at the prompts, unmute yourself and or reach out in the chat. Yeah. So think about it. So I see Sarah, Alida, Nicole, Abir. So I'm sure you guys have things on your mind. Amazing. Thank you, Alida. The question being, what does decolonization look like in academic research? Amazing question. I love that. We will definitely look into that. Yeah. So thank you for putting that out in the ether, because it allows me to be mindful as to how I'm framing and reframing, my methodology, so that you can see directly how it fits in with your internal questionings. But yeah, there's so much potential for decolonization in research. There's so much of it. And a big part of how I personally operate is, as Janet Muck says, those are systems intent on our destruction. So I take that thing and then I pivot it to make it work against its own purpose, but work towards my own, which is social justice achieved through and maximized through decolonization. But we'll definitely get to that in a second. I just want to wait out and see if more people will feel courageous today and share with us, so that I can also see where they're coming in from, and then we can harmonize that much more coherently. So giving you all a bit of minute there to ponder it out, giving you a few more seconds. So just think about what brings you here today. What is your big question, your big ask, or something that you want to share even on the other end? So think about it, giving you a few more seconds, and then we'll just roll forward. So what brings you here today? Amazing. Thank you, Sarah. So how do I start working with participants with clinical practice and research who have different colonized experiences of the world? How do I leverage my privilege to support them? Amazing. It's like we're sharing, we have a telepathic bound here. Yeah, I'm going to lead with Alida's, then Sarah's, and then I will probably trickle into the framework itself, so you can have more of a context for framing and fleshing out your answers. But I would say, going back to Alida's really quickly, the potential for decolonization academic research, what it looks like, for example, is what I would do is I will have a text that has a very colonialist attitude and posturing. And then within that, I would just highlight all the different things that I feel called to disrupt, or all the different things that I know I can disrupt, right? And then I will use that basically to create a counter narrative. And it's just a very systemic counter narrative because I'm pulling, the same terminology, but I give it a different definition, for example, or I'm decolonizing the definitions. And then from that, I create a direct link between what is proposed to me systemically from a methodological standpoint and in terms of the reading materials, right? And then I create like the counter narrative to that, but drawing from the same essence, drawing from the same energy. And there's a way that you can think about the perspectives. You can have the most colonial text and to have the most anti-colonial perspective to that text. So it's how do you reframe knowledge that is presented to you rather than integrate it at face value? Then there's also what other materials and readings and scholarships that you can integrate that is completely outside of that reality. So what anti-colonial scholars and perspectives can you integrate? So there's the act of reframing and reshuffling what is presented to you. And there's the act of integrating new information or new knowledges that exist outside of that paradigm and to make them exist within the same text, within the same research, right? So there's also that. Then there's the presentation of your research. You can abide by the methodological criteria, but you can also look at ways to make it more dynamic. So for example, maybe you can make this a multimedia project as opposed to a paper. Maybe you can look at different ways that the visual culture, the information could be more artistic or creative than strictly formalistic and formulaic, right? So there are many layers that you can play with. I play with the content, and I take the colonial to decolonize it. And I also integrate external anti-coloniality that has nothing to do with the paradigm I'm presented with. Then I amalgamate them. Then I also revisit the presentation. Is it going to be an oral? Is it to be text? What kind of graphics can I use to support the decolonization of that? How can I create disruption on a visual level as well? So you want to look at it systemically so that you never miss an opportunity to do that. And so that the totality of your work can be self-representative of anti-coloniality / decolonization. Then to Sarah's point, right, really quickly going through that, Sarah, I would say there are different groups that are already doing fantastic work like that. And so you could reach out to them, connect with them, follow them, and see how they apply it. But really quickly, and I have a resource that you're going to love. They're called the Black Healing Fund. Amazing. And there's a quote I will be sharing with you later on. And I love it because they talk about how do you create, from a psychiatrist, psychological perspective, a clinical experience and practice and research that is anchored in that appreciation of decolonization, right? From the bodies and voices of people who live the experiences of oppression on the daily. And I really love it. So they have one post that we'll be going through together. So I think you're going to love that. And it gives you different points of consideration for you as, a specialist to consider. One of which is not individualize the experience of racism and oppression, but to recognize the macrostructurality of it. Because some part of the practice makes it so that they make it about your own accountability to the system, rather than recognizing that for all the accountability that one person can exert and muster, it's still something that exists outside of the realm of their own sovereignty. If I'm located within a system that perpetuates, those intergenerational cycles of oppression that carry, real profound psychological trauma, yes, there is my part of accountability to my own healing process, but there's also the recognition that I'm dealing with a reality that is bigger than my own history around, from trauma to healing. And I love it because the way they put it, it's so self-explanatory and also so insightful and very crisp. And I really love it. And there's this new volunteer run initiative that focuses on that. And I would say when you get aligned with different networks like this is when from a practitioner standpoint, you have clinical tools that then you can use in your own practice and you can groom them. And it allows you as well to exist within those conversations and spaces and to potentially even align yourself to be part of the next generation of tools that, the new practitioners of your field will be utilizing. So there's so many considerations from the research element to the clinical practice of it. They're extremely nourishing for you. And that's how you leverage your privilege, because you're getting educated and then you use those tools from, your positionality with transparency. And you can also have referrals. You can have different even agreements from specialist to another. You can attend summits or create summits or events or conversation and amplify healing spaces for your community. And it's not taxing for you because you're diffusing labor, and it becomes a space where you're enlightened by something that is not normalized knowledge in your field. So I hope this helps. Sarah, I see you nodding. Amazing. And I see other folks reaching out. So Abir saying how to use and sell my research outside academia. Amazing point, Abir. That's why I feel it's very important to look at the entrepreneurial aspect of things, right? Because in entrepreneurship, all that language of moving knowledge from one space to the next and to make that a monetizable operation exists. But in academia, we're not particularly groomed to understand how to create economic value around the research that we create, because we're conditioned to look at it from a very unilaterally intellectualist perspective. So how to use and leverage that outside of the academia is also something we're going to look at a beer. But I will give you a quick example that I hope will serve you. For example, I have a student status here at Concordia. And I believe one of the first times I reached out to for space, they also connected me with Jamila. And Jamila is another student, amazing human. But long story short, we started co-creating I joined the hub that she was launching. So it's called the Decolonial Hub for short. But the point being, Abir, is allow yourself to be curious and to explore your points of curiosity that have nothing to do, strictly speaking, with your research. And then the more you invested in those spaces, the more is going to become apparent to you the way that they correlate. And then you can allow your research to exist and very organically outside of the constraints of the academia. And you can make it more digestible, democratically accessible. Like there are many ways that you can create dialogue around that. And another example is, for example, people like myself, socialpreneur. I use my research, but as I'm coaching clients or offering consulting services for other, organizations. And so the idea that here research allows me to create a methodology that then I use to become a sellable good. I create e-courses, ebooks, or other projects like that are all stemming directly from my research. But what's important is when it's outside of the academy, I need to ensure that it's digestible, accessible for others that don't need to have a PhD to follow along. So it's all about relanguaging your knowledges so that now it's accessible to the communities that you want to interact with. And you can create a living and create sustainability around the economics of how you transform knowledge from one space and then you allow it to be integrated into other spaces. But again, Abir, we're going to get back to that. Amazing. And then Alida commenting. So thank you. Also, how to bring disruption to research teams if you are into PI, if they are not necessarily coming to the table with decolonization. Amazing. I love it. So how to decolonize without it being about decolonization. I love that, Alida. So going back a bit to the last comment I made to Abir, the idea is you want to understand how the communities you want to serve speak and think and operate. Because then the value is when you can speak to them in a language they understand, the discourse of decolonization will be reproduced unbeknownst to them, but using their very own vocabulary. And it's important to me that depending on the spaces in which you operate, that decolonization is looked at systemically. So it's not an act of concession from white privilege, right? Because it seems you're giving something away to give back to others. It's not appealing, it's not enticing, it's very reductive, and it comes from a scarcity understanding of what true decolonization can be potentialized as. So let's say you're coming to a research team, right? What I do is I will look at the projects they have, look at all the systemic gaps and deficiencies, and then look at ways that decolonization becomes the answer and how they're answered. You don't need to call it that for it to be that. And depending on the levels of awareness and reluctance and resistance of your team, you want to use a vocabulary that they're going to be the most absolutely responsive towards. Otherwise, you know in your mind that you are still decolonizing all those processes. And then it's about allowing them to grow within that conversation. And then you look at it as a phased project and initiative, because by trying to rush the project, we compromise the potentialities for true decolonization to be occurring. And so you want to have like a staged, going at it stage 1, 2, 3, 4. And I would say it's all about the verbalization. When I use vocabulary that speaks directly to their practice, experiences, expertise, and I can communicate efficiently the value of that which I'm bringing to the table, because I'm saying you have systemic gaps, and here is a set of counter, solutions to that are just as systemic, efficient, proven. You get to back this up. It's easier for them to have buy-in because now they have trust, they understand, the value is clearly communicated and clearly and easily and aptly integratable from their standpoint. So I would say it's all about how you relanguage it. If I go in a very capitalistic project and I use words like empathy and equity and stuff like that, there's no resonance. And it's also extremely alien to their lived experiences. But you have the gift of being able to work with them and function within that part of their world, which is to say that you also have all the tools at your disposal to ensure that the way you speak makes decolonization the most inevitable project that they want to pursue, even if and when they don't call it decolonization. And then when you allow them to do that, eventually you will bring them to a place where collectively you can acknowledge it for what it is. But I would say at the inception of it, you want to be mindful of your language, not to hide behind, but to make it so that people don't have resistance as the only way they engage with decolonization. So I hope this helps. Thank you, Adol. Amazing. And I will take one last comment for now and then I will move on, but definitely I will always be checking in with the chat. So I see I've often wondered why we speak of wonderful discoveries in language many people cannot understand. And if we speak in the simplest of language, more people will gain the knowledge and feel the impact. Exactly. Because when you think of value, to me, decolonization is an act of service to all parts of the world that we're in. It amplifies a very sanitized and mindful and powerful and empowering level of whiteness, just as much as it does Blackness, Indigenousness, and people of colorness. But the problem is the way we language it, it looks like it's a concession, right? And we're attacking the privileges of some, but it's about how everybody can shift their own privileges to collectivize our agency to be self-supported and collectively empowered. It's a very different conversation. And like Adele was saying, the whole point is, if I speak in a language that alienates people, there's no value in that exchange. It's not a conversation. So when you think of value, you think about what language am I using with whom? And it shouldn't be exactly the same templated answers for all the communities that you interact within, because it means that there's a level of mindfulness that is not applied. Because you want simplicity, you want digestibility, and you want actionability. So something concrete and real that serves as the best way to apply and implement the practices you talk about, because or else it stays in the ether. People are going to nod and say, okay, that sounds good, but they have no idea what to do with this. And they can't commit to a vision that is not affirmed or established. So that's a little snippet. Thank you, everybody. So we'll keep rolling forward. Now, let's get into the thick of it. So my little breakdown here is basically me reframing the title and the main values, and then making it more digestible, right? So going back to the idea of simplifying the language to clarify, what is possible in this space. So when I talk about entrepreneurship, I think of intrapreneurship, and the nuance is what? When you're an intrapreneur, it's not about having a business. To me, it's how agile and adaptive you allow yourself to be in any given space, where you look at everything as an opportunity and as a tool to be leveraged to help you get to what your end game is, which is to say, if I'm in a classroom, too often people look at structural limitations as what defines their capacity to be change-making or decolonial in a space. That's not true. To me, the limitation means that's where most people stop, because they believe that it's normal to exist only within those constraints. They're told that this is the end of possibility. And that's where they never challenge what is seen as impossible. So let's say I'm doing research and there's a proposed template. This is a list of recommended readings. This is the format. This is and that. You can understand that, but when you think and you operationalize your mind entrepreneurially, it means your question is, how can I leverage all of those tools to get to where I want to get to without being subservient to lesser paradigms or to controlling narratives? So going back to the example, you have that list of very problematic texts. What do you do with that? Well, you extract all the problematicity and you look at it from a very, as I said, structural approach. So you list them off. And for each element of problematicity, you come up with, something that is expansive, decolonialistic, and so on and so forth. So this doesn't become a limitation that prevents you from being the change-making agent you want to be in that space. And it's this idea that you want to look at all the different ways possible for you at any given point in time to use your privileges as something that creates necessarily social justice. So privilege in and of itself doesn't have to be an indictment, because to give more, you need to have more. So the privilege is, where is that element where I have a bit more of an overflow, and how can I turn that outwards instead of only keep it inwards? So when you have that entrepreneurial mindset, is you don't look at limitations as something that defines your capacity to serve your own ideal and mandate and mission and purpose, is you are empowered by limitations creatively and look at, okay, how am I going to pivot, shift, that element of structural limitation to produce my outcome as if it were inevitable and as if it were to have been inevitable all along. So it's about adaptability, agility as well, in this form of relentlessness that you pursue. Then the other tier to that is media activism, right? So we know that a lot of the canons and paradigms that we are peddled are extremely problematic, and they reinforce, a very problematic level of whiteness in our institution, is very elitistic, right? So if you don't conform with that level of presentation in terms of the knowledge and so on and so forth, then it's delegitimized. We're not even looking at that. We don't do poetry in that class. We do XYZ. So what I love with media activism is it allows you to undo the elitism behind what is perceived as acceptable knowledge and unacceptable knowledge. For example, when you look at, different scholars, even that have social media accounts, or other people that are not even seen as belonging to scholarship, but they have a lot of valid, interesting, fascinating viewpoints that are needed and missing in the fields that we're in. What I do is I focus on the quality and the integrity of the content. So I can extract a lot of information from other sources like poetry, social media. It's getting more transdisciplinary, but then I need not forget I am still in the academy. So how do I take my information elsewhere and how do I make it valid in the space that I'm in? It's all about reformalizing. And it goes back a bit to the comments that I was making earlier on. When you're clear on the content, then your job and your power and your privilege is now you can reverbalize that to the academy in a language the academy understands and respects, right? And a lot of how you can do that is look at activism through media, different multimedia activism, different websites, podcasts, events. Now you focus on the integrity of the knowledge as opposed to the aesthetics of the knowledge. You don't deny knowledge based on where it's coming from, you deny it or reframe it according to the quality of the content, right? So when you have a different criteria that destabilizes elitism and knowledge creation and dissemination, then what happens is you have more opportunities to be enlightened. And then you use that, right? And then you just reverbalize it so that now it's acceptable to the academy, but it also in defiance to what the academy stands for and a lot of the time. And how that ties in with radical resistance, right? So when you look at, again, the state of what is in your field, in your class, in your projects, you will start noticing that there are very reoccurring narratives that produce cliches. It's the same names, it's the same people, it's the same version of history, it's the same materials, it's the same reading list, it's the same this and that. So in that, there are a lot of cliches. So there's an overrepresentation, there's a dominance in certain types of discourse, but there's also an absence in other discourses. So to me, what's interesting is I ask myself, there's something that is obvious about that narrative. So how can I message out what is unobvious about that narrative? Then the other question to me is, what are the things that are never questioned that we looked at as the foundation of that field, of that methodology, of that book, of that theory? And how can I destabilize that to be able to establish a decolonial way of reappreciating that same piece of work? Right? So again, it's working with what you have, where you are, but then disrupting that so that now it becomes the catalyst for the opposite of what it was intended for. That's how you apply that resistance. So it starts for me with an intermixing of disrupting, reframing, reshuffling what is already there. So I can expose and reveal the decolonial potentialities that were denied. And then also bringing in new forces, new paradigms and counter narratives to that, so that I can even support more my claim. That's up to me to see. And then the last part of that is the transdisciplinary intelligence piece. So as I put here, disruption is the how of activism. Because to me, how I bring value to people is to allow them to shift in their positionalities and to be awakened to something that was there all along, but that they were conditioned not to see or to unsee. And so here, disruption activism is an act of service. You give them more enlightenment and more capabilities to fully appreciate all the knowledges that are sitting in the room, but are not acknowledged. And then that activism piece now becomes how you justify also the social impact and relevance of your research. Because you want your research and your project to be fruitful, you don't want that to be an academic article that sits on a shelf and dies there and doesn't carry a life of its own, because it's a lot of time and investment on us energetically as well. And you want to make sure that there's a purpose that is achieved and operationalized within the project that has more to do with a specific pursuit of intellectualism, but that makes it an act of generosity to our communities, right? So we're going to get into how we do that in just a second. And then a few other notes on, different considerations in that paradigm. In any class, project, methodology, research you're in, we're dealing with non-neutral information, but that is presented as if it were neutral a lot of the time. And here, neutrality for me is a non-option, because when you know that there's systemic oppression occurring in our research methodologies, being neutral just means playing along with the dynamics and never controverting it. So neutrality is a non-option for me. And there's beauty and power in seeking a very fruitful, intentional, and activistic non-neutrality, because now you disrupt and you see, okay, we're always talking about those kind of narratives, and those here are erased, annihilated, or denied. So how can I now apply direct focus, which is to say, I'm not neutral. I'm applying specific focus to that, so that now I can, elevate the quality of the intelligence that exists in my field. So that's the kind of non-neutrality I'm talking about. So it's very mindful, very intentional, and very activistic in intent. And then to that, what's interesting is the point is not to apply vitriolic against different models that are proposed, because there's a validity in all the different systems and for all the brokenness that it can also carry. So what I'm interested in is, when you have a nuanced discourse, is when you facilitate the transition from one experience of coloniality to one possibility of anti-coloniality, which is to say, I have all those problematic texts. I'm not going to bash them into the ground. That's not productive. It's not critical. So what I'm doing is, what part of that works that I will sustain and protect, and what parts of that am I going to, remove, so that now I can make way for the best form of discourses that are aligned with decolonial values. And as you do so, as you're seeking a different way to be truthful in that space, but you're not righteous and you're not all-knowing. And so you're allowing different competing discourses to exist. You honor them for each part of validity that they own, right? And then you just harmonize them so that now they all exist in support to decolonization. Because then you're drawing from the strengths of all to be able to carry your discourse. It's less work for you. And it's also a much more intelligent way to produce the decolonization you want in discourse and academic research. And then another consideration too is to be mindful of what I call equalizing dissidence. The fact that there's more than one way to do decolonization is not a problem. It's an opportunity. It's a richness, because it means that you get to choose something that is more aligned with where you're coming from, and it becomes the most organic way for you to embody that message. because too often is this idea that we all need to agree. We need to, there's one way to do this, and how come so and so person is doing it in what way? But the truth of the matter is, different peoples are colonized differently. Therefore, there needs to be available to them and to the community at large different ways of engaging decolonization. The point is not to colonize decolonization and to force it to exist only in a one-way model. It's to acknowledge that dissidence, disagreement is healthy, it's rich, it allows us to be even more mindful and to tailor our research to specific communities. And then the other element is look at collective empowerment. What is the way that through my research, I can be mutually honoring of myself and my community of service in a way that generates collective empowerment? And again, at the beginning, I was saying that this is not about concession. There's nothing that I'm relinquishing. I'm just pivoting my narrative so that now I'm enlightened to the parts of what was normal for me that was not productive, that was not generative, that was problematic. And I'm allowing space now for the narratives that are never heard or visibilized or protected or enhanced to exist and to be supported, right? And I do this in a very transdisciplinary way. And so this is about collective empowerment. Amazing. Thank you, Adol. Amazing. And then the one last part that to me is the most vital one is how can we integrate and honor a bias towards execution? Because again, the point being that we want this to carry real tangible impact in our communities of service. We don't want that to sit on a shelf and just die there. So what I love is once you've done the different steps, you've already done a lot of work because you've broken down the assumptions about what was neutral and acceptable in your field, right? And you look at it from a very all-encompassing perspective. And what's beautiful is you also come as the bearers of solution. You're not there to point fingers judgmentally and unhelpfully. You look at what is broken systemically, so acknowledge the state of systemic brokenness that services neither whiteness nor blackness nor people of colorness. It doesn't serve humanity, right? And so then what you do is you're investigating alternative paradigms that then allow you to produce systemic answers to that. And you allow for there to be different ways to do decolonization. You just stick to the one that is most aligned with the specific community of service you are invested in. And then you focus on, as I was saying, the bias towards execution. So how do I make this real? How do I make this concrete? And we're going to look at it in a second. So looking at what this looks like in action, I've put together a few prompts, and that's going to be part of your experience in the breakout rooms to be able to investigate and to play with that. So let's take it from the top. When you're looking at your research project, and that's as perfect for you to do at any given point in time. It could be at the beginning, middle, or close to the end. There's always something you can do to pivot your trajectory to make it much more wholesomely decolonizing. So we start with the acknowledgement of the state of what is, the state of coloniality that we are immersed in. So what broken, non-neutral narratives are celebrated, normalized, and protected in my field? That's your first question to yourself. And it could take you a minute to get there. And by broken narratives and non-neutral narratives, I mean systemic oppression, racism, and so on and so forth. But those are very my keenest interest. And I love the paradox because yes, it's oppressive, but it's also celebrated. Yes, it's dangerous, but it's also normalized. Yes, it's problematic, but it's also protected. So when you think about, thank you, Alida. So happy we had you with us. No problem. So when you think about your field through those lenses, it's very interesting because now it's like you're taking off the scales from your eyes on some level. Right? It's a challenging way to rediscover your field from a totally different understanding of reality. So you're not presuming that it's neutral, you acknowledge the non-neutrality from the start, and you want to see systemically and specifically where is that non-neutrality applied dangerously to target specific communities and specific discourses. So once you've done that, then the next step from that is look beyond your paradigm. Right? So what's one area of expertise you're drawn to, you're curious about that is blatantly disconnected from that niche? Because that's where we're going to leverage that beautiful positive disruption. Because there's something in you that is attracted to something that you're told is not of service to your research. and yet it's still a part of your yearning. So what we're going to do is to draw specific energies from that and information so that we can use it as a way for you to mobilize decolonization in your research. As you do so, it takes us to the third step. So it's a transdisciplinary connection. How can you push your niche, your research, your field, your project into expansive decolonization through that disconnected paradigm? So let's say I love photography and I'm doing translation. There appears to be a lack or there appears to be a disconnection here, at work. But when you think about it, again, going back to, I'm walking you through the steps and I did. There was a specific article, academic article by Jacobson talking about the 3 different types of translation. Either you translate from English to French, so interlingual from one language to the next. Either you translate intralingually, so let's say academic English to non-standard English or dialect to an English dialect, so it's intralingual, or you translate how Jacobson would say transmutationally. So I translate a play into a comic book or a comic book into a podcast. So you change the medium, right? So if I'm drawn to photography, now there's a way that I can create a connection between translation and photography through transmutational translation. And that comes from somebody who's not necessarily interested in decolonization or invested with that purpose, but I am the connector between those 2 possibilities. So now my project is, okay, I'm going to integrate photography, but now I want to be mindful what type of photography. So I can go on Instagram and I look up my favorite, I don't know, guerrilla activist who does photography and the queer, Black community in Haiti, in my grandma's village. It's extremely specific. So I'm going back to media activism. But now I'm using that medium. I make it legitimate within academia. I use it to fill my research. The content and the format is decolonial because it's anti-normative. It's produced by, people that are invested in that kind of activistic work. And that's where I create the connection between the brokenness of my field and a completely disconnected paradigm that allows me. So that's how you make that connection. And then as you do so, you want to look at how can I make this a space of collective empowerment, right? Because here what's interesting as well is in connecting 2 different disciplines and 2 different projects, I'm also connecting different communities. Because in my example, I was looking at that activist group that exists in my grandma's village in Haiti. So that's one community. And then I'm looking at the community of practice that I have here in Canada, my fellow colleagues and researchers and students and peers and what have you, right? So now I create that connection. And then my question is, how do I make this mutually honoring and mutually empowering for them? So what is the thing that this community here gets to learn about that other community that if it weren't for that project, they would still remain completely disconnected one from the other. So that's how you want to look at the collective empowerment piece. And as you do that, the next level of consideration as you're finalizing that piece is, how can I make this real? You want to honor a bias towards execution. You don't want to get caught in the loop of being extremely intellectualizing, but not practicalizing any of your intellectual research or academic research. And so the question is, how can you enforce accountability towards measurable gains, social transformation wise? So how can I make this real? How can I make this tangible? And a lot of that to me goes back to those different communities you become a hyphen for and to. So the community that is typically silenced and excluded and removed and annihilated from those spaces is the community that I want to turn to and I want to learn from, because they have answers. They know, they're self-supporting enough and accomplished within their own sovereignty to know what they need. They know what they seek and to know what they've been doing. And so from then on, I already have a big chunk of my answers, and working together, we can generate something. So let's say in that example I just gave you really quickly, the specific group I'm thinking about, that's a real example. My grandmother, she has this grassroots activistic group in Haiti, in our village, and they have a website and they're looking at ways to disseminate the voices. And so the way that you, for example, I could come together, right, with them would be, what do you need? And how can I be in an answer of what you've already established as a priority and how to manage the needs of your own internal community. I'm not colonizing their processes because I don't think I know better. I'm invested in how they're already positioning themselves to do so and how I can enhance and accelerate that, and then become the hyphen between their collective empowerment to my other community. So now it becomes an act of social transformation that is bi-directional. So that's how you get to deal with your research. And your research, depending on what the answers are, you can talk about the developments that are happening there. Like there's so many ways that this can go. But this is my quick framework on how to harmonize from start to finish, the different ways to make this concrete and real and social transformation driven. So a few examples really quickly, because I want to get to the good stuff with you guys. And again, feel free to react, share in the chat. But if I give you the example of my MA really quickly, it's typically English, French translation, it's text, it's the same paradigms, the same approaches. And so I went and I did my little list. So I went through the framework here. What are the broken narratives that are recurring? What's something I feel called to do that's outside of that discipline that is seen as disconnected? How can I use that disconnection to create positive disruption that allows decolonization to exist in that space? And how do I make this an act of mutual honoring between two communities that are differently racialized and differently privileged and underprivileged? And how do I make this action driven? So that's my framework. So for my MA, I went through all my things and I go creating a website, focusing on translation on oral stories and knowledges rather than text. And that valuing oral stories from different racialized communities, like my community as a post-contact, Creole language, Haitian Creole. And I want to activate allyships between different racialized bodies. So having the Black experience and then different Indigenous translators and self-translators coming together. And how I make that executable, it's a website. I'm going to vulgarize all my research so other people can learn from it. They can download it as a track and they can listen to. And it's disruptive because it's oral rather than text. And it's going to be like a music album that people can listen to with sound effects to make it fun, engaging, creative, and rooted in an anti-colonial experience, language, and expertise, right? So that's how I did that for my MA. One I really want to share with you is there's Ice Cube created this fantastic, together with other fantastic humans, created what he calls the contract with Black America. And it's looking at everything that's broken in the States and coming at it from a very strategically economics driven perspectives, and explaining that basically with targeted universalism, when you empower the weakest link in your societal, reality, all the other fringes and groups and community are heightened for it, because it means that the extremism between the person who is the most materially accomplished and the person who is the most materially destitute, because that gap is closed, it means that everybody that exists within that interval is more protected. So saying that when you protect, the most, disenfranchised communities in your group, it means that all the other communities are bettered for it. But it breaks it down in very systemic bills, economic projects, housing projects. So again, you look at the systemic brokenness, you create a systemic counter narrative, you give solutions that are very implementation ready. And then you look at how is that beneficial for all the communities that live within that space, not only the disenfranchised communities. So I'm calling this the economics of anti-oppression, because the big part that's missing in those conversations is the economic value. Why should I care? Right? Particularly coming from this capitalistic misunderstanding and misappreciation of anti-oppression. Another one that I mentioned to Sarah earlier on is the Black Healing Fund. And I really love their work. So this one is about how, like, 8 ways that therapists can perpetuate white supremacy. So when you maintain power dynamics and you deny the expertise that the patient carries, that is stemming from their lived experience. The other one is when you look at systemic oppression as something that's about a belief, or you believe racism exists, rather than acknowledging the undeniability of that reality as a macro structural, functioning of governance and our society and our conditioning. And then they talk about how you overemphasize the individual. So what you have to do to reverse engineer racism, it's a very problematic question. And it shows that you're forcing accountability and forcing accountability only within the body and agency of a disenfranchised person in a way that denies the reality that for all my accomplishment as a self-determined human, there are a lot of elements that are external to my agency that are carried by the system. So can we acknowledge that, please? And then the other point being, we're not going to talk about race. We're here to talk about XYZ. So shying away from elements that, again, they're ingrained in the trauma that the patient is sharing. And then another one is dismissing that rage is healthy. It's a healthy emotional response to those things. It's not about living in constant, high level rage, but it's saying that rage owns a much deserved space in the conversation that takes us from trauma to healing. So not run away from that, particularly with the Black woman language, stereotype, or the angry Black woman stereotype, etc. And then and talking about, oh, but that happened a while ago, slavery. Why you're talking about this? Your trauma is not actual. Your trauma is not present day relevant, right? Rather than understanding that we are benefiting from existing legacies that are self-perpetuating and that are not ending. And so trying to put a timeline on, intergenerational trauma is extremely problematic. Then the other one is, blending out a lot of different things. So understanding that, there's a cultural competency that exists in that, and that there's a difference between being culturally competent and understanding diversity. And then the last one is being neutral, because as we said, because we live in a non-neutral reality in field of research, applying neutrality just means that you're supporting complicitly a state of what is that is extremely problematic. So this one is how you could potentially look at turning your research into action. So let's say you do your research. Nothing prevents you from engaging communities in circles like this and make digestible your work, and that is a form of digital media activism. Yeah. So I just wanted to give you like a few different examples. So we look at the economics of it. So creating an action plan that is an economic plan, and also it carries some aspect of legality in it, because we're looking at the judicial aspect, the economics. I mentioned translation. Now we looked at healing. There's also this fantastic app that is called Not Okay. And this beautiful soul here that created it. Long story short, Hannah had this very debilitating illness that she was dealing with, and it would cause her to faint at any given point in time. And she got bullied, like she lived through a lot of stress, and she's a suicide attempt survivor. And from that lived experience, she recognized that she's not the only one who lives through the circumstances. And she created an app for people to say that they're not okay, so that they could be put into context where you can talk with specialists in their fields, and they could be taken care of by a community. So it's this idea that you look at what's broken, what is absent, what is effective. You look at a systemic counter paradigm that you can create. It empowers a collective. It comes from your trauma that heals others. And what Hannah did, pairing up with her brother, like together they have the app. And I believe that's very interesting for us researchers, because there are elements of research we can carry, but we don't necessarily have the means or the wherewithal or the expertise to know how to create an app. But it's not up to us. That's where we get to team up with other specialists to add this layer to our research, so that we get to focus on the research and they focus on the implementation, but we work together. So think, what app could I potentially create, in regards to my research? Or how can my app support, how can my research support pre-existing projects, apps, and so on and so forth. So this was another beautiful example that I feel extremely inspiring and relevant. And again, thinking of how you can execute. So now that you've refined your project, you've disrupted it, what are you going to do to make it implementation ready? There are many resources that exist here at Concordia as well. So I joined the 3MT competition. It was very helpful. And this is a space where it's free. You are coached by people that are outside of your discipline. So it's again transdisciplinary, and to give you feed forward on how you can recalibrate your research to make it, more innovative. Part of how you want to make it innovative is to be aligned with decolonization. And then at the end of the process, you're pitching your research thesis in 3 minutes max to people who have no idea what you're doing. So you have to emphasize values on digestibility, accessibility, actionability. It's a beautiful test for you. And as I was doing this, my research evolved from a thesis to a creation research, just to tell you how impactful it's been. So those are resources you can utilize, whether or not you win, that's a secondary consideration, but to help you look at how can I make this digestible, accessible, and actionable. Then, as I was saying earlier on in my example, turn to people who have the expertise to make it real. So it's another way for you to integrate that transdisciplinary intelligence. Maybe an app would be great, or maybe a website would be great, or maybe a conference would be great, but it's outside of your wheelhouse. No problem. Just turn to somebody else who has that expertise and you guys can get aligned. And that allows you to evolve your research even further, but it doesn't take away from your research. And then as students, not everybody knows this, but we're entitled to lots of funding. So as you evolve your research, you can find different opportunities for you to even be eligible for funding, scholarships, and other opportunities like that. You can do it from an university-wide level. You can do it by teaming up with faculty that can also have buy-in in your project. And you can look at it from a graduate student perspective. And there's also the small grants program. I believe it's mentioned at some point. But the idea being, when you go full circle, they are resources. Thank you, Ado. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. Amazing. So yeah, so those are the ideas, from thought to execution. That's where you want to go. So now let's open up the floor to Q&As. Any questions, anything you want to add or contribute, any reflections you've had, epiphanies, and so on and so forth. So don't worry, share in the chat, unmute yourselves, and then we'll roll forward so that you get to implement it for yourself in a second. So I'll give you a second. Any questions, reactions, insights, anything else you want to add? Perfect. Because when you think about it, decolonization is how you create more intelligence in your field. When you look at that, everybody is interested. So the language is powerful, but it's also the reality. So it gives you different ways that you can spin that. With the contract with Black America, I loved it. So many things that were just mind-blowing. I loved this other researcher talking about targeted universalism, as we're saying. So when you are evening out the playing field so that the extremes are less extreme, and that people that are extremely enfranchised, that is to say privileged, and people that are extremely disenfranchised, that is to say non-privileged or underprivileged, get to exist in a more of a proximity to each other, then the whole society, gets elevated through social justice, because there is a security net that will catch more people when they fall, even the most unprotected people in white America, for example. And so the way that you want to look at your own connections, right, is your own research as a potential to be part of that space. And what helps me is I look at my research as a pilot project. So I don't have pressure, and I can focus on do it less and do it better, and then from that on, I can create a ripple effect and to get more people involved in my project. But anyways, let me know if you have any questions before we roll on ahead. We'd love to hear from you, or any reflections as well in the chat. Let me see. Thank you, Nicole. So we're saying, appreciated what you said about pivoting, not relinquishing. Helps me think about and look at my thesis project of the future spaces I'm in. Yeah, because often, because we don't see a lot of folks doing that kind of work, we feel that we have to disengage from our own internal values to be able to maintain academic legitimacy as a researcher. But we don't have to split ourselves up like that. It doesn't have to be this yes or no binary. And that's what colonialism will love to have us believe, and that's what it conditions us to believe as well. So when you look at pivoting, it means there are elements of problematicity that you choose to keep, because that becomes the way that you start a conversation. There's an expectation for what your project would be like. And then 2-3 lines in, they realize, oh, okay, that's not what you're going to do. And that's how you hook people in your project, and you make it enticing for them to know more. And that's how you already start establishing and communicating value around your own research interests. So thank you so much, Nicole, for sharing. Anybody else? Yes. So Adol, you're saying, I love the idea that when you empower the weakest link in your system, the rest of the structure becomes healthy as well. There were efforts in my country of birth with affirmative action policies set in place. However, 60 years later, the most vulnerable remain where they are, and there's a small group getting more wealthy. Is this where we then need to look at the power of corruption when implementing policies? Yes. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things to unpack. Of course, I will need to have more context for it. But what helps me look at it at all is I look at it as a system. So before a project or a policy gets implemented, there's a lot of behind the scenes negotiation and deliberation that occur. So who is a seat at the table? Do we have are the people that are part of those vulnerable communities represented at the leadership level? We need to look at it like systemically, so that at every possible opportunity, there's something that can be leveraged and into decolonization. So when you think of the ideation, who gets to ideate, the execution, who has to execute, the leadership, who's towards those projects, and what conversational spaces are open for us to check in with the community to make sure we're on track. Are we just waiting till the very end to ask people for insights, or are we creating different checkpoints with them so that we can recalibrate and pivot, not in a way that doesn't disrupt the project and prevents it from being efficient, right? And then where does the accountability lie? Who is accountable to who in this process? And when the project is completed, how do we carry that accountability forward? What is phase 2? What is phase 3? What happens after? What next? So there are many considerations to look at, particularly when it's a top-down rather than grassroots or non-hierarchical way of managing it. So there are many different ways to look at it. But a lot of the time what happens, I don't know, just to go back quickly on that, what I've learned on targeted universalism is that when it's not applied, what happens is the money gets distributed to the already established and privileged, and then the leftovers go to the people, the communities that are the most vulnerable. But when you do the targeted universalism, that doesn't happen, right? And so sometimes what happens is maybe people pretend or they think that they're using targeted universalism, but what they're doing is they are, distributing only within consolidated circles of power and affluence and privilege. And then the leftovers as an afterthought is what gets, redistributed somehow. So that could also be something for you to think about or reconsider or to factor in. But a very good point. Amazing. Cool. So what I would love for us to do, we could take a few minutes. We're going to do a quick Kahoot, okay? And so I'll be sharing on my screen with you the instructions. You get to participate. Amazing. Perfect. So thank you, Douglas, for the heads up. So now what we're going to do is I will be sharing with you my screen, and you're going to be prompted to open up a separate tab. Go on Kahoot.it and enter the code. If for whatever logistical reasons you can't, it's okay. You're just going to be able to follow along with us. But it's a way for you to be engaged and participate differently right before we get into the breakout rooms. Okay, so it's going to be one of the few steps before the breakout rooms. And it's a way for us to unpack a bit further what we just discussed. So just give me a second. I will leave that, just pause, and I will open up the Kahoot in the meantime. Excellent. There you go. Amazing. So now it's ready. You're going to be prompted to join in. So as I said, what you want to do is open a separate tab. Go on Kahoot.it, input the code, and then they'll be asking you for your nickname or however you want to self-present. And when I have a few folks in, I will start the quiz. It's like a little quiz, if you may. And on my screen, you will see the questions. On your screen, the answers. And this way, everybody gets to participate that is equipped to do so. Thank you, Dreamer. So everybody can jump in whenever you're ready. Sarah, great. So I will give you guys a few more minutes just to figure it out. And don't worry if you can make it into the platform, you will still get to engage just a bit differently. And we'll go through a few of these questions. I believe I put only 4-ish. So we get to use it as a way to be self-reflexive. So I will give the rest a few more minutes just to jump on the platform as well. Thank you, Nicole, Sarah, and Dreamer. And I will give you a few more seconds to more willing souls to jump in. Okay, so a few more seconds, and also let me know in the chat if it's not working for you. It's not a problem. As I said, you will be able to follow along. So for those of you who signed in, keep in mind that on your screen, on your tab, you will see only the answers. And on mine, you will see only the questions. So you look at the questions on my screen, think about it, then click the options for answers on your screen, and then I will carry the conversation forward. Great. So what about we use that, the people we have available, and we just get to it. There you go. Yay. Great. So let's look at what we got. Yeah, education should be neutral, that's non-activistic and apolitical. As we were saying a bit earlier on, the reality is when you go into your classes, you're dealing with a state of unacknowledged non-neutrality. So any claim to neutrality is just going to reinforce that state of what is that carries a lot of structural elements of oppression and problematicity. So when you acknowledge that the reality of your surrounding is not neutral, then neutrality stops being this ideal that we want to strain towards. And we look at what are things that I can do that are a service to my community and that allow us to be transformationally evolutive in how we engage decolonization and research. And so the fact that our institutions are extremely politicized, but again, because it's not acknowledged, we have this, it's very seductive to live into this fiction of a world where, oh no, knowledge is knowledge and there's a difference between this and that. But when you analyze your text, you will see that there are a lot of dominant narratives that get reiterated, but they're not presented as such because they're seen as the standard, the golden standard, the norm. That's why it's extremely normative. So because it's not neutral, the way we engage it also needs to be disruptive. And I cannot be disruptive if I'm a complicit, complacent, or disengaged, or boasting a sense of neutrality. So let's roll. Oh yeah, there's a bit of a scoreboard. It's really cute. So I think we're getting the gist of it. So let's roll on to the next one. Interesting. So yeah, I would say it's all about the how of it. I will tell you this. As a Black queer student, I've been uncomfortable my whole life in the education system. So discomfort already exists in the classroom, it's just not acknowledged. And also, as people are not used to being comfortable, get uncomfortable, but some of us, our legacy is discomfort in institutional settings. And so as understanding discomfort has always been part of the experience, but it's never been mobilized fruitfully, positively, and intentionally as a tool of social transformation. It's only been seen as the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about, but it already had to sit at the table. So because it's already there, instead of trying to shy away from it, how can we turn this to good use? How can we make discomfort something that we crave as an indicator that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing? If I'm not uncomfortable reading certain texts and methodologies, there's something that is missing in my educational awareness. And that's not something that I should try to cultivate or strain towards, right? And so it's this thing that discomfort is already there. Are we acknowledging it or are we not acknowledging it? And then when we are doing so, either the acknowledging or the disacknowledging of it, what's our motivating principle? Is it because I don't want to get into that, which is to say, I want to exert my privilege to choose to willfully disengage? Or is it to say that, okay, there's some discomfort, let's talk about it. What's going on? What are the things that we're resisting that we're not embracing? Is it because it's new? Is it because it decenters, experience of whiteness as the way to be neutral, as a golden standard of intellectual, of intelligence? In that space, in that field, is, understand what is the root cause, what is the lineage of that discomfort, and how in that lineage and appreciation of that lineage can we learn about how to be anti-colonial and decolonial in that space. That would be my little thing. Perfect. So let's roll on. Third one. Yay, amazing. So yeah, for me, I would tell you this. I feel, again, it's this bias that against decolonization, saying, if we're saying that decolonization is difficult, we're saying that supremacy is easier on some level, right? It's all about how you do it. And it's also systemic change, and you want to change your reality. It's going to take what it's going to take in terms of time, but there are immediate gains that you can already establish and assert for yourselves in the here and now. So there's an immediacy to the process, and there's this longer, evolving timeline that also exists. But when you come in with this very abrasive language of difficulty as an assumption for how decolonization has to be carried, it's extremely heavy at disengaging, and it doesn't allow it for it to be positively empowering and to also carries longevity, because it feels like such a strain. So again, it's us being mindful about how we do this. And if there's something difficult about it, it's not to say that the work itself has to be so, it's also the way that we go about it. If the sets of strategies I've established for myself engenders unnecessary difficulty in the work, I cannot pin this, and all fairness and consciousness on decolonization in itself. Supporting supremacy is as easy as difficult as supporting decolonization is. The question is, am I going to over-identify with the difficult elements of decolonization as a way to give myself an out and as a way to legitimize resistance about that kind of work? So I feel we have to be mindful about the language that we use, because it also permeates the way that we engage that kind of work. And thank you. Yeah, exactly. Because if that's difficult, what is easy? And are the things that are quote unquote easy the things that should be difficult? Maybe we could ask ourselves, how can I make supremacy more difficult than decolonization? Right? Exactly. So it's all about the reframing and the shifting, because when you shift within yourself, when you go to partners and allies and other folks that you want to engage into that space, your language will be empowering and enticing to them. But if you go, oh, it's difficult, it's complicated, you're already losing a lot of the membership that you could have had. And that's what I'm seeing a lot, And I don't believe in that. I'm not living this as a trauma. I'm living this as healing. So let me use language that speaks to my reality. Yes. Amen. Thank you, Nicole. Amazing. So fourth question. Great. So let's look at that. So doing anti-colonial work within the academy puts a target on, and beyond puts a target on our back. Again, it's how about you do it? And what about the strategies you're using? I would say yes and no to that one. At the beginning, when I was figuring out how I was going to do that work, it was a lot of hit and miss. And I didn't have a templated way of, acquitting myself behaviorally and methodologically. So I missed it a few couple times. But when you have a robust set of strategies around you to ground you into the work, and you're also mindful of the different communities of service and practice you're interacting with. So if I'm in a given class, I understand the language, the methodology, their positionality, and I'm able to speak the same tongue, but a different language. So I speak the same methodological language that they are. It's just that mine happens to be decolonialist in intent and in purpose. So I believe that the missing link and what makes it feel like we put a target on our back is how we are addressing it and how we're engaging those conversations with people that are not fluent or practice or invested in decolonization. When you use confrontational, abrasive, alienating, and exclusionary language, you will create the target that will be on your back. Not because the work itself demands that it be so, but because the way you are using the work to interact with people that are still, tentative about it or unconversant is problematic. So when I'm reaching out, I'm aware that this is an educational communicational exchange. My interest is how can I bring value to that person, to that community, to that prof, to that space, so that decolonization becomes the most inevitable way for us to engage meaningfully. When you know Kelly like that, there's not going to be a target on your back. There will be resistance, but there's always resistance. So that's not news. But it's all about how you approach the work. If you presume, difficulty, you engender difficulty because it's part of how you function. And the same way, I will ask myself, what are the communicational strategy I'm putting into place so that my practice is understandable to people that are not conversant in it, but not only is it accessible, it's also palatable to them. And then we can start creating a space of relatability. They don't have to identify as a colonialist for them to engage my work and to also draw value from it. I love Adolf. So you're saying, I will need a sounding board for this. So I wanted to say no, but I have felt targeted, even though I did not think my words were abrasive. Well, however, look to see if my words are problematic. Yeah, Adolf, I mean, I sense, I can't see where this will be coming from. There are many, I feel there are different distinctions for us to make, right? There's hostility. There are moments where we're overly visible and moments where we're completely invisible. There are moments where we have problematic texts as well. But I feel that, the difference between all those things is when I say there's a target on my back, it adds heaviness to me. But when I recognize, okay, that text is problematic and yada, 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 I feel that my job is how can I extract the validity of that text and add my own decolonial energy to it in a way that my peers and colleagues and people in my space can receive it and be empowered by it. And that to me is why it's important to have solutions, and the bias towards execution on top of the disruption. Because sometimes what happens is it's just a laundry list of problematicity, but no counter solutions, no dialogue, no space for collective empowerment, and no bias towards execution. So it just sits there. But I'm not saying that's what you were doing, but I'm just saying that's a lot of what can happen and gets, and happens in specific spaces. So I feel that when we can even decolonize our own language and our own experience and how we feel, we take away a lot of the heaviness that tends to be put on us, that we put on ourselves when we do that work. Because when I come at it from a place of lightness and collective empowerment and co-creation and positive disruption, I'm not denying that I am being met with reluctance and resistance and sometimes dehumanization, but I'm saying I choose not to operate in that mind frame, because then I'm only compromising my power to reach out to people who need to hear those discourses. But if I'm too depleted by the heaviness that is put on me and that at times I choose to put on me or that I claim, then I compromise my capacity to be more change-making and powerful in my decolonization. So I feel the reframing is more for us, because we're never denying the state of what is, but we're saying, how can I not make that an internal condition of how I identify and engage with the work? So that's why I reframed it. And I'm happy to see that it gives you some food for thought as well. So that's going to be the last one. Huh. There you go. So yeah, so the question being, using colonial or strategically problematic text materials is a mistake. Yeah, exactly. Because to me, it's not a mistake. To go where we want to go, we have to acknowledge where we are and where we come from. And when we try to obliterate history to make it seem like it's like what it's never been, it's a problem. Because how can we talk about anti-racism when racism isn't acknowledged? How can we talk about anti-coloniality or decolonization when colonization is not acknowledged? The question is not what texts or materials we're using as much as how we are using them. I can have the most problematic text on earth, and I encase it within such a beautifully robust anti-colonial narrative that now it becomes the piece for my own anti-colonial revolution, you know? So it's important to acknowledge the legacies that define the context for academic research. And Dave Chappell talks about it. Nowadays, people have very brittle ears. Just because I don't want to hear it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be heard, because this is the cornerstone of my research. The reason why my research is justifiable in terms of its capacity to generate social justice is because it inserts itself at cross purposes with a paradigm of controlled and systemic oppression. So we need to know where we're starting and not be afraid to call it what it is. Colonialism is colonialism, oppression, racism, racism. So, or else we are denying ourselves the vocabulary to create the change we want to see in our worlds. So yeah, and you've seen I've put strategically. I get to choose and pick certain texts, and I can also edit, I can go for certain segments. So what in that extremely problematic text carries the most beautifully unsuspected opportunity for amazing decolonization is what I'm interested in. So even amongst what would have been deemed otherwise as the worst, I have a very powerful opportunity to change the paradigm upside down from within. So that's what I want to do. Yeah, so they have their little podium. They always do this at the end. So I have Nicole, and then we have Dreamer, and then Sarah. Hello. Amazing. Yes. So yeah, so that was, let me get out of that one. Yes, so that was the little Kahoot moment, right? But breaking this through in our psyches, how we engage and interact with the work is so necessary, because if we're drained, we won't be able to be as powerful as we can in that space. Yes. Congratulations, Sarah. Amazing. So what I'm going to do, I want to jump on ahead to the breakout room. So this way we get to do like a good 10 minutes. And what I'm going to do is share with you the prompts. And I want you to focus on one thing. Think about your own research. And think about the brokenness that exists in the research that you're in, the field that you're in. And think about how you can reach out to somebody who's outside of your field or outside of your positionality and come together to enhance the potential for decolonization. So I will walk you through, here. So let's say I want to annotate so we can see. So that's you here, that's your niche. And I want you to focus on that. So when you'll be in the breakout room, think about your own research and think about in your field, there are elements that are celebrated, normalized, and protected that are extremely problematic and dangerous and oppressive. And then listen to the other person doing the same, what their research is and what the state of methodological brokenness is in their field. And then look at how can you draw from one another so that you can find answers to the brokenness in your field through somebody else's projects. So that's how you get to come together. That's what I want you to focus on for this one. Okay. So I'll give you like a few minutes, think it through. So think about your research. What is defective in your field that is celebrated, reiterated, unchallenged? And on the other hand, as you'll be talking with the other person in your breakout room, listen to them and see how you get to gain from their field, from their niche, from their research, as a way to start looking at, as a way to start finding answers to the brokenness of your field. So that's how I want you to look at it. So I put my little drawing, think about it for a second. And then what we're going to do, just get you set up for the breakout rooms. Let's say we'll put like 2 or 3 people per room so you get to really talk with each other. Oh, amazing. So the rooms are created and then open. So think about that. What's broken in your field and how can you find answers to that brokenness through somebody else's project? That's your question. I have, let's say, 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back after that.
Folks are coming back. Oh, Shazine, you're muted.
Yes. No, amazing. No, I just think some people they want to wait till the last second because the conversations are so juicy. Okay. So that's good. Good.
Wonderful.
It was so interesting. I took notes. I want to share this with the group so we get to be, learning what everybody does is so interesting. Yes. Really just a few more seconds. Amazing. Perfect. Yeah, Mauricio was like with the kids, so we could hear for a few minutes there. That's so great. Amazing. I think we're just missing Adol. Give it a few more seconds before saying anything. Great. So, well, thank you, everyone. It's already, it's almost going to be noon, but I really wanted to take a second to share with you what some people have said, because I believe it will be beneficial for the group. And for those of you who feel called just to succinctly let us know what happened, it would be amazing in your own circle, in your own conversation. But Mauricio was talking about this amazing project, dealing with language, and looking at the legacy, the erased legacy of Indigenous languages in different parts of South America, and understanding more about like the roots of those, erased languages. And some of them are very mathematical. So the mathematical science between the erased Indigenous languages in different parts of South America. And then how do you pitch an education program that's geared towards languages that are systemically erased? And a language that is palatable to them. But the second you say Indigenous language, like, you get that other reaction. So how to work around the limitations of the system so that you get to do what is most necessary, in those spaces. And we were talking really briefly about the Montessori school model that is extremely visible and recognized in spite of, the elements that can be improved. But the idea being, how do you get buy-in on some level by more established bodies that do your work, but without the decolonization in mind, right? And also I wanted to throw out there as well for Mauricio, but also for others for whom it could be interesting. There are different platforms where you can meet with other specialists and the language fields, for example, and where you get to also assert the legitimacy of your research. And then you can use it and leverage that to say, hey, this is my buy-in, this is my visibility, those are the people behind me. For example, Mauricio, and I will put that in the chat, there's the polyglot community that is huge, it's blowing up, and it's also very white-centric and in narratives and in presentation. Now they're having this awareness moment. So I would say capitalize on the momentum to insert yourself and criteria for you to be a speaker, they're not complicated. There is a level of accessibility there. So there's the Lang Fest. It's in Montreal, Georgia every year. And typically it's either in University of Montreal or University of Concordia, basically. So it comes to us. Now it's probably going to be online, but just for you to know different circles where you can hear about what other people in the field are doing, and you can network, and you can also leverage that visibility to assert why they should listen to your project and give you the time of day. There's also Polyglot Conference Global. There's also Women in Language. So I feel those are places that are great to look for allies, to educate yourself and to challenge their discourses, and to have visibility as a decolonialist who does language as a way of advocacy in life. So that was what came to mind. Also on Mauricio, but thinking of everybody else, there's Dawson's has an alternative school education program. And this is a beautiful spot for you to ideate different pilot projects or research material you may have, because it's the most anti-normative part of the institution, right? So sometimes you just want to look for the crack, so you get your foot in, and then you can establish yourself with some sort of institutional backing. So I feel that Dawson, in regards to that specific school program, is interesting. If for any research that any of you could have, it's a beautiful opportunity, because you can connect with the profs and the faculty there, and you can pitch your projects, and you get to also create social transformation in the way that the new generations are groomed in their political and social awareness around, you know, the projects that you do that are related to decolonization in some way, shape, or form. And again, it's this idea that you have credibility, you have practice, you're vetting your research in the field, but because they're also anti-normative, you know, you will have more space for you to keep ownership of your ideas and projects with the least amount of friction and resistance. And I know that Mauricio was talking about the length, right? How you have a paper and they want you to produce 5,000 words or whatever, and finding that to be very limiting and irritating. So I would say within that context, there are ways you can negotiate, but also think of how you can take your research and make it exist in other forms where you don't have those limitations, right? Amazing. So I'm going to put that in the chat, Mauricio. And in the meantime, so sorry I talked so much, but I really wanted to share that with you. I want to hear from you. So if you feel called to unmute and are sharing the chat, that would be amazing. In the meantime, I will be sharing the different resources I outlined for everybody. So take it away. Then there's my fast.
Are you guys waiting for me? Is it my turn?
If you want it, it is. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
hello everybody. Nice to meet you. It's just the internet is so stable over here, so I have to run around the room or the house really. So nice to meet you. And Jess, thank you for having us here. Well, you said pretty much everything. With my wife, we've been in university all our lives, and we work in hospitals and in education. But now that we have 2 kids, we think it's better in terms of. Can you hear me? My internet. I'm gonna take my camera off. I'm gonna take my camera off so probably I have more bandwidth. So we decided to create a new way of educating our kids, just because we can, and but also because we feel our kids deserve it. We didn't want to go into the traditional route based on the what's been happening with the COVID. Most parents have been saying that they are the ones who've been doing the homework, and they don't see any benefit from learning to write or read if the emotional and the most important knowledge is not in. So what's the point of learning a song if it's not teaching you something really deep? So we thought to going back to our roots. We found, as Jess saying, that our language has been taken away from us. I mean, we didn't know this when the Spanish came in. They took so much from us that we didn't know. We don't know what it is like if a thief come into your house and it's empty and you don't recognize really what was in there. And so we try to reconstruct all that without going too much into detail, but yes, finding the essence of it. And the essence of it is 13 pieces of knowledge. And 13 pieces of knowledge, I've been working in many countries, and what I found is that all these traditional cultures have pretty much the same thing in common. For example, you know, being in community, taking care of your own medicine, taking care of your own food, you know, more relationships now that we have this COVID pandemic, but also we have loneliness pandemic, if you could say that. And so we decided to go back to that. And what Ches was saying is that the moment we started advertising that we wanted to create a new kindergarten, and we said that it's based on ancestral knowledge, they said, oh right, but they weren't interested. But the moment we said that actually it is ancestral, but it's based on Montessori and it's based on Rudolf Steiner, they said, wow, we really, wow, are you going to be teaching English? And I thought, no, we're going to be teaching you know, traditional language from here. And I said, oh no. They even said, are you going to charge? so that's funny. It's funny. So we started at the moment our project where we live. We have a lot of green space out here. So we have couple of teachers that are working with us, and for them to teach with us, we want to train them, and we want to train them is on little things. For example, one of the things that I was saying to Chess is that if we, I mean, I'm going to show you just a little bit of what the school is about, if I can, Chess.
Yeah, maybe if you could, maybe I want to be mindful of time. So maybe I know 30 seconds to a minute would be great. And then we could wrap up, but I'm sorry about the time constraint.
No. So I'm just so excited about this. So it is, so it's instead of putting things into kids in terms of knowledge into kids, we want something is educare is putting things into kids. Educere is taking things out of the kids in the sense of knowledge out of the kids. So our basic principle is that kids already know. They pick up things so fast because they already know. So how can we take things out of us rather than putting things into us? Why we have to have 150 books to put it in, and once you do that, then you're called a master or doctor or anything. But what about outside of you? So that's the basic principle, and be based in nature, and be more with the elements and more with people. So that's it.
Amazing.
So any clues that you tell me that we can link with other schools or all the projects will be much appreciated.
Amazing. And you also have my information in the presentation. Yeah, so I'm saying, Adol saying it's interesting that colonial name of Montessori would carry more influence than ancestral. This is a case in my birth country as well, which is a British country. I want to disrupt that. Yeah, exactly. And I feel that a lot of the work that we do, everyone, it's we're straddling the lines. So I feel it's how much of the colonial we're going to carry to produce the anti-colonial. So for example, with languages, I will create bilingual programs because this way I get buy-in from the colonially established entities that back up education for those colonial languages, but at the same time, I'm accessing a pool of students that have no expectations for the work I'm going to do, but they're also more open to this because they aren't already educationally compromised on that level against the work that I do. And I get to bring different communities together because the English speakers will be put in spaces with other speakers of different languages they have never heard about. So I feel that a lot of the constraints play in our favors because the work we do gets to have a bigger resonance than only within the communities that we want to serve, right? So it could be a dialogue, exactly. So I feel bilingualism and multilingualism is a beautiful resource. And one example of that, her name is Elisa Polese. She's a language teacher and she teaches simultaneously like 4 to 10 different languages to different clients. And I find that to be very interesting and it's very organic. And for you, Mauricio, I believe it would also be interesting. And for everybody else, because she has a very interesting framework and she's very accessible as a human and very open. So those are people you want to get in conversations with. And I met her through Langfest. I was attending, I think it was Polyglot Gathering online. But just to say that when you go to spaces like this, you learn about somebody who does something that's completely outside of your experience, but it also opens doors in your mind as to what can I do about my research to pivot it towards the direction I want to go. And she's one of those people. So learning 3 to 4 different languages at a time, because then I'm taking at least half of those languages could be indigenous languages, could be post-contact languages, could be minoritized languages, and conversation with English. And when you're learning decolonially, any language is going to change how you speak English as well. You will have a different level of mindfulness, going back to what Mauricio was saying, right? Educere. So the way I will speak out the language will be very different. And it means my ideologies, my conceptology, my understanding of the world, all of that also trickles in through language. So I guess that would be my little spiel. I'm sorry about having gone over time, and I still want to hear from you. So you have access to the PowerPoint, and if you want to reach out, it's always my privilege and my honor to do so. I guess Anna probably want to take it away as a wrap up for your final words, but just thank you so much, everybody.
No, actually, I don't want to wrap up, Shazleen, because this is fantastic. Thank you for the love that we're seeing here on screen from the participants. We really appreciate, Shazleen, your energy, your time, your kind of openness to sharing, and just the way you facilitate these workshops is really inspiring to us to witness as well through the space. And we kind of hope that more folks use your models. So we'll be sure to share this recording, the first part anyhow, when you present it with as many people as possible. And yeah, thank you, participants. We really appreciate you spending the last couple of hours with us here today in conversation. Thank you for your engagement. And on that note, we will be closing up, and we wish you a bon appetit, and hopefully you have lots to reflect upon and think about as you kind of carry on into, well, the new month now. So anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks, Shazleen. It's always a pleasure, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole, Mauricio,
Bye.
everyone.
Nice to see you.
Yes.